Welcome to Life-Changing Challengers, the podcast where passion meets purpose. I'm Brad Minus, your host, guiding you through stories of transformation and triumph, from endurance feats to overcoming adversity. Our guests defy the limits and inspire action. Ready to ignite your desire and incinerate your barriers? Join us. Your journey to the extraordinary begins now. And welcome back to another episode of Life-Changing Challengers. My name is Brad Minus. I am your host, as always, and extremely excited because I think we're going to have a ton of fun today with my guest, Kim Korte. And Kim is an author of the book, Yucky Yummy Savory Sweet, Understanding the Flavors of Emotions. And she is a podcaster, of which she runs the podcast Flavors of Emotion. So, Kim, how are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. I'm really looking forward to this. So I have a feeling this is going to be a lot of fun tonight.
Yeah, that's what we try to do. But I'm just excited to hear more about you and how you came up with this premise of flavors of emotion. So I'm so excited about that. But first, the question that everybody's waiting for me to ask. Kim, can you tell us a little about your childhood, where you grew up, the complement of your family, and what Kim was like as a kid?
I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area on the peninsula, so that's south of San Francisco, and spent pretty much most of my life there as a kid. A true Capricorn, so they say, very strong-willed, very independent, and also a problem solver. My parents told the story. My dad actually just reminded me of this not that long ago about how when I was around 3 or 4, and my sister, who's a year younger, so she was probably 3, let's just say we're 3 and 4, they were both really, really sick and fell asleep, like just passed out because they were so sick. And they woke up and they were like, oh my goodness, the girls, what's happening with them? And they came down to find us on the floor eating cereal. They could see that I had made steps out of the cabinet lower drawers, climbed up, got the cereal, and brought it down for my sister and I to eat. So even as a young girl, I was trying to figure out, like, what's the problem and how do I solve for it? And I was raised in a fairly religious house. I would say very, very strict religious house. And, was very active in that. I had some unfortunate thing happen to me in that religion. One of the young men in the organization did something with me that he should not have when I was 5. And that kind of played a role in my adult life. Then another sad thing growing up is my mom was an alcoholic, and that also played a factor in my life. I mean, it was hard to watch. And, she eventually died of it right after my 30th birthday. And that was really hard because we were super, super close. And like I said, just a real strong-willed, independent from the get-go, really.
Wow. So makes me think of it just because I'm also a Capricorn. What was your favorite toy as a kid?
My horse. That's what comes to mind, is this horse that I got. And I wanted a horse so badly, loved horses like crazy. And I had this plastic horse, and I had a few horses, but I had this one, and it was just my very favorite horse. And I had that horse for so long, and I really wished I would have kept it. But I think that, and then my baby doll, which I had for many years, and I lost in a move. But I had a little baby doll that was cloth bodied. I don't think you're as old as I am, but back in the day, they had little plastic arms and plastic feet and cloth bodies. And my brother would rip it, and my mom would do surgery on her because he was such a brat. I'd say those are my 2 favorites.
Interesting enough. So I think when I was 5, and I got this amazing rocking horse that turned out to be my favorite toy. It was almost life size. It was a pony that you got on, and it had the full legs, so it looked like a full horse. It had these springs that would jut out from the 4 quarter panels. so that you could bounce it up and down and go back and forth and up and down. Sitting in the living room with the Lone Ranger on the television was always my
Bugs Bunny was my favorite.
Yes. Bugs Bunny and Roadrunner show and Saturday morning cartoons. Love it. Love it. And then, of course, I did have action figures, not baby dolls, but action figures. And those were the life-size ones.
Big.
My uncle made me blocks, like out of 2x4s, no, 4x4s. So he made me blocks. And my parents said, my dad always says this to this day, he says, we would buy you stuff for Christmas and you'd probably spend about a week with it, but you'd always go back to the blocks. So here you are, right? You had some mischievous stuff happen to you at 5, which shaped your life, and an alcoholic mother that you were still close to. Oh. So that's kind of crazy. You said that it kind of shaped your life as far as having your mother as an alcoholic. What was your life lesson learned by having someone so close to you that ended up passing away of this debilitating disease?
Well, it takes you a while to kind of come to grips with it and really see your life. Like, you have to be willing to be open to look at your life for what it is. And just because she was an alcoholic didn't mean that she wasn't a wonderful person, but she was definitely a woman who had her own demons and she didn't know what to do with them. She didn't know how to handle them. And one of the things in my life, like from as long as I can remember, was we just didn't talk about things. Like, it was, call it willful blindness, cognitive dissonance. It was something that I realized, like talking with my father, even now, like he's 91 and he's been talking a lot more with my sister and I about his childhood and his life. And we hear stories. We both see him once a week and we are now hearing stories we've never heard. And it gives us insight into why he was shut down. So, having two parents who had life experiences that shut them down, raising kids, so that made that difficult because then they shut down difficult experiences when it came to us. And it was a pattern I can see that happens in lots and lots of families, but that comes with ramifications. And not knowing how to handle your emotions or not being taught how to handle your emotions, recognize them, is one of them.
Yeah, I don't think that that's like a skill set that we get really handed down from our parents. My dad was pretty strict on me. He was the typical, hey, you're a good boy, you don't cry. You don't take your anger out on anybody else, but we'll find places for you to do it. So you do it on a soccer ball, on a punching bag, whatever, and you get it out and then you move on. That was it. That was like the sense of my emotional sensibility training. That's as far as it went. But I think that was pretty common in our generation.
You can't teach something that you don't know.
Exactly. So did you go to university?
No. I did, but online. Not like go to university.
Okay. What was high school like for you?
I was like, my girlfriend and I, her name was Betty, we were like neutral city. Like we were friends with everybody. Didn't matter what group, because, back in the day, this was the late 70s, early 80s, you had the stoner group, we called them, and then the jocks and, the cheerleader group. And then they had the smart kids. And then you had all the rich kids, because I went to a school that was bussed in people such as myself who were middle class, and then a bunch of really poor kids into a school that I went to school with the son of a very famous singer. And there was, on 16th birthday, they drive in with their, Porsche or a brand new car. But it was kind of like a real weird, interesting experiment of the haves and haves nots. But my friend Betty and I just fit in with everybody, and everybody knew us.
I was around that too. My locker partner was a redneck. I was on the wrestling team with the jocks. I hung around with some stoners, but my best friends were all the nerds. So yeah, I get it. I totally get it. But also for me was survival. The school I went to wasn't exactly easy as far as social goes. So sometimes it was good to have friends in every group to have your back. So it was more about survival. If you did not go to university, what did you end up doing after high school?
Working. And then, Yeah, I just worked, even though, I just advanced. Like I was always advancing. Like I started out like at a fast food store. I went, I think it was Wendy's maybe or something like that. Like one of those kind of places.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah. And then I worked, in a restaurant food chains, in their accounting department. And then I worked for a bank and did all kinds of stuff. I worked every desk at that bank because I'm a very curious person and I get things pretty quickly. I worked all the desks. The only thing I didn't do was the operations manager and I think the wires desk. I think those are the only two things that I didn't do. And I just kept moving on in my different places that I went, gaining more knowledge and using that.
You're one of the first ones that I've talked to, at least. But so lately, the trending is starting to move away from college again. Like when we were kids, it was you either went to college or you went to work.
Yeah.
Maybe, and then it was later, it was even after me that I got out of high school that the trade schools came up. Maybe if you didn't want to go to college, you can go to trade school and then go from there. But usually it was.
I didn't go right after high school because of the religion that I was in at that time. I left it in my early 30s. They discouraged you from getting a higher education. They really no, if you did that, you were like, Satan was going to get you. So that was why.
So, that's a great question that I just came up with because I'm so brilliant. Was that just the women that were that were? It was everybody. Then too, from getting a higher education. Okay, I'm sorry. You're just gonna have to tell us what religion is this?
No, let's not go down that road.
Oh,
let's not.
I just because I've heard of Muslims and stuff. They're like, no, I don't want our women to get higher educations, but they wanted their men to succeed.
They don't feel that way today, but this was back, like I said, the late 70s and early 80s. I guess they've changed their stance. I haven't been with them for a long time. The thing was that they could corrupt your mind.
Right.
And, that you would leave the fold. That was why they pressed that. But I don't think they do that today because I've heard of people whose kids went to school, but it certainly was discouraged in my day.
Okay.
Yeah. You wouldn't think, but they did.
Right. Because like I said, growing up, it was the women, right? They just didn't want women to do that because they didn't want the women to be smarter than the men and then start talking back. And then we'd have this, the infighting that would happen. So that's what we all heard, right? Growing up. So when you said you went to fast food, you actually started like everybody else making burgers and drive-through and all that. And then you moved over to restaurant and you actually got into the back office.
I think what I did was I went to a bank and then I went to a company that owned a large restaurant chain that was really big back then. It was called Lyons Restaurants chain. It was all over California in several states, I believe. I worked in their payroll department. So that was after I worked for the bank. I actually got poached because they were a customer at the bank and I was the vault teller. So all of the big clients who were giving me, what did you call them? The merchants, they would come. I had the merchant window. So the merchants can come straight up to me. I'd have to count out all their cash. That Lyons was one of the merchants that was a customer. And he handed me his card and he said, would you like a job? Then that's what I did.
All right. So there's a certain point around this time or somewhere in the line that you probably got married?
Yeah, no. I did not get married till I was 32, I think, the first time. I was 32, so I was single that whole time, much later than most people. Back then, it was becoming more and more popular, but I think that, a lot of my experiences, because of what happened when I was young, I had pushed all of that down. And when my mom went to rehab when I was 28, I heard this licensed social worker talking about alcoholism and then all the things that happened in the family. I wanted to see this woman because I thought, well, I'll talk to her about my mom's alcoholism and how this has impacted me. And then what came out was all of the abuse that had taken place, like my repressed memories and the things I had pushed down. And then I think that was probably the reason why I hadn't gotten married up to that point. And it took me a few years to kind of work through all of that. And then my mom passed when I was 30, like I said. And right after that, I had my mom wasn't gone very long at all. And I had done what they say to do is to confront the person who did this. It was a couple of them, but in that process, it didn't turn out very well for me. And I don't want to get into all the details because it's a very crazy process to begin with. But it was so devastating to me that how badly it turned out for me that I left it. And I pretty much did have a nervous breakdown because I thought my faith was everything. And I felt like God didn't love me and that he wasn't with me. It was just such a bad time. And that during that low time in my life is when I met my first husband and married.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so just because I know what happens after this. So I wanted to ask, how long did you date your first husband before you got married?
We met on February 5th of 1995, and we married in September 1st of the same year. It was fast.
6 months.
7.
7.
Okay. 6.
All right. So how did that go? How was it? Now where are you You're working at the restaurant place?
I'm working several jobs later, and I was working for a man because I went into the world of real estate accounting, which is property management. I've worked for large owners of real estate prior to this job. It's called a real estate investment trust, and I was an accountant for them. Then I went with my old boss who left that job to a smaller company, and it was a lot of joint ventures and limited liability companies. So there were several of those. When I was working for that company, I met my now ex-husband.
So I was trying to paint the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So you're working for this joint venture firm. Did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy the work?
Yeah, I liked the people. We had a lot of fun. Accounting is accounting. It's the people who make things fun. So we had a very lively group. Back in the day when I worked for Lyons Restaurants, I initiated a chair race. We had this long office and we'd get chairs and put our arms in it and go backwards and see who could make it back first, or go forwards and see who could win. We had a lot of fun.
So it sounds like you had a job that at least you didn't mind going to, at least. You know, you're probably making a decent salary. You had a husband at the time that you loved. Sounds like at this point in your life, things were going pretty well.
Yes, things were on the upswing because when things went really sour, I was working at this company and they were very supportive of me. And so after meeting my husband, my mood and my life lifted up quite a bit.
So you mentioned that it's your first husband and now you're ex-husband. Yes. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I'd love to. So he had been ex-Navy and wanted to go to school. He had previously been a carpet installer. And I said, hey, because he had moved from New York to be with me. And I said, well, before we get settled with 2 salaries, let's try and live on mine and go to school. So he went to school to become a chiropractor. And I supported him throughout. He would work weekends on occasion for this company doing carpet installation. But it got to a point once he got into chiropractic college, because he did all his pre-school work for, that he had to get in the requisites.
Prereqs, yeah.
Yeah. And so he got into the chiropractic college and we moved to be near the school. And I also got a new job that was a better income for us. So everything was going really well and it was a lot of work. I was happy to help. Like, I felt like it was he and I together. And we both said this to each other. It was like us, trudging our way through to try and make a better lives for ourselves. And we had all these dreams and we would walk around this Lake Chabot and talk about like what we were going to do and how, we would build the practice and eventually, get it built to sell. And one thing, I was in complete agreement. He really wanted to live in Southern California. So I said, San Diego is fine. I'm not a big SoCal person. And so that's what we did. He graduated, and a few weeks later, we drove down. I kept my job for a couple more months because I was implementing a software for this company I was working for, a brand new GL software. I actually call it ERP, but it's a system that they use to manage all of the real estate and handle all the commercial management, the leases and AR, AP, all that kind of stuff, if you know anything about accounting. So when that was done, the company that the software that we implemented, they offered me a job. And so I moved down to San Diego and got this job months later because the market kind of tanked and it impacted this company I was working for, and I got laid off. And so I said, well, I've got unemployment. Why don't I help you build the business? And we built like really fast. Every year we doubled. Every month it was just tremendous. And I did a lot of the marketing and the accounting. I learned how to do all the stuff it took to bill and all that kind of stuff. So it was a great adventure for the two of us. And eventually my ex-husband wanted to open up a running shoe store, which you're going to appreciate, Brad, because he focused on feet and gait. If you're having back problems, he would first look at the feet, because even when he was in school, he was able to help people just by putting in a lift in one of the shoes. Just something ever so slightly, centimeters, could make a huge difference on the wear and tear and how you walk, which is gait and running gait. And so we opened up a running shoe store, and it was stressful, beyond stressful. But during this time, we also had hired this woman to run the front desk because I wasn't running it for the chiropractic practice. So we opened up a running shoe store, and we had a door between the two, which could lock. So like when the store was closed or the chiropractic office was closed, we could lock people out. And I was running the shoe store, and he was doing his chiropractic thing. And I was still doing all the books and all that stuff because that's just the direction it took. At one point, though, so just as a point, I had done consulting work around this system that I used to implement, but he didn't want me to because I was away from the business too much. So anyway, long story short, he starts an affair with the woman that we hired, and it went on for about a year. And it wasn't like she was just an employee. Like, I loved her. I thought she was my friend. We used to have so much fun together. And every Monday night, the practice would be open late. So I would go home and make the three of us dinner. And yeah, it was hard. And so, I guess you can kind of take it from there. We got a divorce, and I moved from San Diego back to San Francisco because of my connections in my old consulting world. I got a job in San Francisco, and that's the marriage.
Oh my, I can't even imagine. Oh, how you felt. I mean, first of all, I've been to San Diego a few times. Mm-hmm. I don't think there is better weather and atmosphere, cleanliness anywhere in the United States like it is in San Diego.
It's pretty nice.
Yeah, I've run a couple marathons out there and a couple triathlons. I love San Diego. So here you are in one of the nicest environments in the United States. You're in love with somebody. You've built two businesses from scratch.
Yes.
And they're thriving. And it sounds like, from what I'm getting in it, is minus the accounting, because you said, of course, accounting is never fun. But it sounds like the rest of your work, you're having a good time, and then you just had this little piece that you still enjoyed with the business consulting. So it sounds like life was freaking amazing at this point. And
yes,
just to find out that
consulting had ended before we opened up the shoe store because he didn't want me away. But I definitely had lovely people who worked for us because we had the shoe store. We had great people. Our patients, I loved our patients. And, you build friendships with all these people. So
Right.
my whole world was in these two rooms, in these two offices.
How do you handle something like that? How do you handle it just being stripped away, just like that? What did you do? I mean, besides moving to San Francisco?
Yeah, you lay on the floor of your condo. So this was like my tipping point. Mother's death, the whole religion thing, all of these things that had happened. And, I was laying on the floor of my condo. It went from light to dark. And I just laid there like doing like a life review, really. Like, how did I get here? What did I do? Like, why, what was I so bad? I didn't think I was that bad. I knew I'm a strong personality for sure, but I didn't think I was a horrible person to deserve this. And I got up and said, I'm not going to let this happen to me again. And I realized I can't change anybody else. I couldn't change him. He was also another one who never knew how he felt, couldn't face reality of things. He was a pusher downer, as I like to call it. I just made a decision right then and there. I'm like, I'm not going to do this again. And that's when I went on my journey.
All right. So here you are,
Here I am.
some major adversity from the get-go.
Yep.
And now you built things up. You got to a point where you were super happy. Everything was great. And now that got stripped away. And then you decide, no, this is not going to happen to me again. Now it's these steps that you're going to take. Tell me some of these first steps that you were taking to say, okay, I'm not going to let this happen to me again. How do you go about that?
Well, I didn't know what to do. When I was in San Francisco, I think that was for like a year or so working. And I was just flailing. Like I was just trying to keep one foot in front of the other. I remember my friend came to visit me and we were walking around San Francisco because I lived in the marina, and she and I went for a walk and had some lunch, and there was a running shoe store and she runs. So she goes, oh, I'm going to go in here. And I went in with her and I had to run out back outside and I just started bawling. And I needed that year to kind of like get my footing back. And I got into my work, and then I had an opportunity to get back into consulting. So I implemented another system for this company that was a system that was related to the system that I used to implement. So I went and talked to the owner, and he's like, I would hire you, but I can't. He goes, if you become a consultant, I can send you work. So I quit my job, moved back to San Diego because I told you I was stubborn, did not want to be run out of town on their terms. I wanted to leave or do whatever I did in the future on my terms. So I went back to San Diego. I started my consulting business, and that was great. And then I had this neighbor, Marla, and she said, hey, we got to watch The Secret. And so I watched that with her, and I thought, oh, this gives me some ideas. And I built this heart. It's a Venn diagram. So if you imagine a heart like a Venn diagram, and so one side of this upper circle is me, the other side was my partner, and in the middle was the two of us, and everything that made up the V down below, that is my friends and family. So this was to represent my time in my relationships, because I wanted less time together and he wanted all time together. And I felt unbalanced. And in my reflections, I thought we really were happiest when we had this blend of not being together all the time. And so, not together at all, I called a chubby heart because it's wider. Yeah. And then if you're together too much, it's a skinny heart, because finding that balance, I thought, was really important for my next relationship. And then I kept this heart up all the time to kind of say, this is what you want. This is what you want to have, because what's a secret about visualization? And then my friend who was having problems with his girlfriend, and we were out for dinner, and I said, here's this heart. And he's like, you got to write a book on this. He goes, this is good stuff. And so I did. And that was my first book. But even that wasn't enough. That just wasn't enough.
Hey, well, I mean, that's fine, but I guess I have a statement or think about that. So it's so interesting that you say that about the Venn diagram. I can totally see it. And I never thought about it that way. I've always been one to sit there and say in my relationships that I felt like no matter where you were, no matter if you were friends, if you were married, engaged, whatever, you needed a world that's just yours. And you have a world that's just your partner's. And then when you get to that Venn diagram, you've got the world that's yours together. But I always felt like you've got to have these outside friends, these outside relationships that sometimes will become together, but most of the time will not be. Because what the heck do you talk about at the breakfast table? If that skinny diagram is together like this all the time, right? You're always together. So what do you talk about? And then all of a sudden you feel like, oh, I can't talk about anything because we already know each other. We know everything. We work together. We sleep together. We eat together. So where is the conversation at the breakfast table?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
It's work. Just to say, the office is closed. No, I don't want to talk about patients. I don't want to talk about this. Let's talk about planning a vacation. How's your mom? Should we go to the movies? I just could not talk about work anymore. And he would get mad. It was just not a good fit. But it was a good fit at the time. It was a good fit. The relationship served a purpose for both of us. It launched him to where he needed to go, which was with her. And it launched me where I needed to go, which is this journey.
So, yeah, that was just the whole thing. I think that's for relationships in general. And I see that. The couples that I see that start to separate and divorce are the ones that are together more than not. I like being with my wife too, but, you know, we should have separate friends, separate lives on the outside. So we have something to talk about when we do come together, you know. Yeah. But even if you work with your spouse, I mean, I've been in situations where spouses and stuff have been around. If you're talking about the vacation or something at home, you're at work and all of a sudden your husband comes up to you and say, hey, listen, I was on the net. Here, take a look at these when you get a chance for our vacation. When you're working together, it all comes together. Hey, remember we talked about this yesterday? Here you go. And that happens at work. Though then you come back, and if you don't talk about work because you don't want to, then it's like, well, we've already talked about everything else while we were at work. So where is that time to know each other outside of our own lives that really binds you when you come back together? So yeah, that's how I feel.
And obviously I feel the same way. I wrote a whole book about it. And I thought, like, if you have to spend so much time together, your question needs to be why. Is it your insecurity? Do you not trust them? Are they untrustworthy? Then why are you with them? And it's looking at the reasons why you need that much time, because it's healthy for us to have lots of relationships. We are, for most people, I'm obviously very outgoing, but for most people, you benefit the more exposure you have to different experiences. It brings a lot to the table for you as a couple, but you as a person.
So what was the name of the first book?
The Perfect Heart, Creating and Maintaining Love-Life Balance.
Well, you are not a fan of short titles, are you?
No, I am not.
Not at all.
I won't do it.
So where did you start looking at the tie between the physical and the emotional?
I was always on this journey for balance, right? And then, and I kept thinking that thoughts, because that's the whole thing. Think your way through all these things. But it just wasn't working well enough for me. It's like, there's got to be a little bit more. And I read a book called How Emotions Are Made, The Secret Life of the Brain. And I was like, it was like the clouds parted, the sun shone down on me, and I was like, ta-da! It was like, couldn't believe it, like a process. So I'm very process oriented, as I know you are too, Brad, because of your job. And I was thinking to myself, this is amazing. The brain has a repeatable process. And if I know what that process is, well, then I can work with that. And I can figure out how to improve my emotions because of this process. That is, a lot of what I use in my book is from that, because the author of this book is not the only one who talks about the predictive nature of the brain, but she does it in such a fabulous way. And she's the author of the theory of constructed emotions, which basically says that in every waking moment, we are getting sensory input and the brain has to do something with it. It's got to make sense of it. And so we make sense, like you are predicting me now with your brain. Like you've been around me long enough now or seen me and know, like if you saw me again, you'd know Kim, but you already had the concept of a woman with blonde hair and all this other kind of stuff. So it's just building on this concept that we start to create when we're little tiny babies, like from the time even that we're in the womb at at 7 months in the womb, we start to recognize voices. And this is all a part of this learning and this wiring that takes place in the brain that we use to see, we use to hear, we use to smell, we use for everything. And our brain is predicting all of it. And we don't notice this prediction time, but that's what the brain does. So it was mind-boggling for me, and especially after I read a few more books on similar topics, is that, our whole world is in our head. There's a great philosopher who talks about like red. Do we both see the same red? We don't know when we look at red that we are seeing the exact same red. And even how I see you could be different than how your wife sees you, just because I don't know how she sees it, because it's all in here. Well, so are emotions. And we predict our emotions. And what we use to predict our emotions is just what we use for what we see and what we hear. So I call those recipes that we use for our emotions, or emotion recipes. So when this data is presented from our inside and outside world, and I'll get there in a second, the brain gathers it and it creates, we call them memories, call it learning, call it experiences, call it beliefs, whatever you want to call it. It's all the same thing. So it's using everything it's got available to it in our brains, and it's going to make a prediction or a best guess based on its closest match. So that's what it's going to try and do, is get its closest match. And so these little neurons in our head release these peptides. It's like a bunch of servers. So the neuron cooks the recipe up, and then it gets sent out via these peptides to our body. That's the physical chemical reaction that we get. That's our emotion. And then we feel it when we can connect to the sensations produced by these peptides. In fact, the author of her name is Candace Pert. Molecules of Emotions is the name of the book. And that's where I learned about these peptides that get released. And so our ability to connect to those feelings is a sensory system. And so when we can connect to the feelings, then we can better recognize those emotions that are created. But just like you said, your dad told you don't feel, I learned like this doesn't feel good, so I'm not going to feel this, or I just learned to not feel things that seem like it could potentially be bad. And so I shut down that sensory system, and we can build it up. And that's why I like to use in my book the example of flavor. So flavor is a combination of senses, just like our emotions are using a combination of senses. What we see, what we smell, we know from COVID how important our sense of smell is, in addition to our taste buds, to actually capturing flavors. And it actually changed flavor to something bad. And then we've got what we hear. They have studies now that show that certain sounds can influence the flavors of food. That's why they have music, or that's why they play certain things. So all of these sensory systems can factor into how something tastes, and so does how we feel about it. If we've had a bad experience, it's going to impact our like or dislike of something that we see. And we might not give it another chance, or we might assume something, like we might see a food and go, "Oh, I don't want to eat that," without ever really tasting its flavors. And your original experience could have been wrong. Like you could have tasted it incorrectly, or it could have been made differently, or whatever. The point is that it's including all these sensory systems that we use for emotions, including how we feel inside, which is why I use food. If you're someone who's not comfortable with emotions, you might be very comfortable with food. If you learn how to taste food like a chef, noticing all the little intricacies and nuances, that is a skill. I propose, and others would agree with me, that it's also a skill to recognize our emotions and that with that kind of distinction, to notice the nuances between certain situations so that you can distinguish them from other past experiences.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you to give us an example of the flavors that lead to an emotion.
Okay, so let's say that they're ingredients. So let's say that you walk into a room and you hear somebody's voice and you recognize it as a certain person, and you go up and you talk to them. Your past experiences with that person are going to be influencing that whole experience.
Okay.
And, or let's say you believe that a certain race or a certain religion is a certain way, and you find out that someone is of that religion, or that there's a group of these people. And so you start to feel a certain way because of that bit of knowledge. That's like saying that all bagels taste the same. They don't. Not all pasta dishes taste the same. And when you start to lump experiences and people and groups and locations, if you start to lump them into this one bagel group and not noticing the nuance of like, well, it's not just a bagel. It's a bagel with cream cheese and a fried egg, and it's got salt on top of it. And so we don't take that type of time, and actually it doesn't take that much time once you get used to doing it. But it's going to change your experiences in the world, because you're going from seeing this much of a situation, just like if you took a taste of food and you said, "Oh yeah, it tastes good." Well, if you can taste it and say, "Well, I really like, this flavor or that flavor," like I was explaining earlier. So if you can take a situation and see it more broadly and experience it more broadly and be able to distinguish this situation differently from those situations that you felt about before, guess what it's going to do? It's going to open you up to understand or know people or things or situations or whatever it is. It's going to broaden you so that you're able to distinguish that. And if you're dealing with anger, let's just take that as the pure emotion. Let's go back and say, if you were to have a pepper, you have a variation of peppers. And so when you have anger, that's kind of like I call like a garbage can emotion, because you could be irate, you could be miffed, you could be perturbed, you could be unhappy with something, or you could be enraged. And being able to look at the situation and not letting your recipe call for it, because if you don't have that kind of distinction in your history, if you have that kind of distinction, don't have that kind of distinction to recognize a situation differently from another, and you always just go to anger, this gives you that breadth of emotional flavors. Yeah. Because miffed is way different feeling in the body than enraged or anger, right? All you have to do is think about if you're feeling like perturbed. I'm a little irked versus I am angry. It feels different in the body, and the body responds chemically different.
Okay.
Did that help?
Yes. So, situation where I'm trying to better myself. I come up to a stoplight and I'm watching the light go turn green. Somebody in front of me is on the phone and misses it. And so we end up missing the light now. And it's all because of that person that was on the phone and the light turned red. And now I've got to wait through another full cycle. And I get more than miffed. I get perturbed. I need to take that back and dig into that to find out, well, what is really going on here? Is it just because this person's on the phone? What happened before that made you miffed because he was on the phone that made this light turn red? What are those flavors that are making you do this, making you feel this way just because somebody was not paying attention for just this 1 minute in time?
I talked about how our brain stores all of our emotion recipes, right? It stores everything, but for the intense purposes of this conversation, it stores our emotion recipes. Well, our kitchen, the brain, it might not be in good working order. So think about your underlying mood that you're in any moment. Your mood, if you're tired or hungry or angry at somebody else, you've got this condition that you've put into the kitchen to kind of predispose how it's going to cook. So if you're already in that state and not out of it, well, that's the kind of recipes that you're going to cook up, right? But this is where thought is so powerful. Our responses are automated. And the only way for us to overcome that is with conscious thought. So thoughts that just are generated, right? Like non-conscious thoughts that we get, like we're not really thinking, it just comes to us. Those are using the same things, those same memories. The only difference is that memories are made up of sensory signals, right? Like all that sensory input that goes into making our memories. Like we may remember the thought, but the initial response has those sensory systems of what we saw, what we heard. Think of any memory that you have, and it's going to be what you saw, what you heard, what was going on around you, and how you felt at the time, because it's a sensory system. Our thoughts that we have are going to be generated from those same kinds of recipes. And we can consciously stop it and say, okay, what is going on here at this moment? Because anger doesn't serve anything really in a moment like that. It's not serving you. It's not serving them. So what is it about? And it doesn't take that long if you just say, hey, you know what? I don't know what's going on with this person. They may be talking to, the emergency room that their kid is in, or that their mother is in a panic, or something's going on in their lives. And so if you were really needing to get anywhere, maybe you go into another lane, or you gently tapped so that they get, prompted to move. But, understanding in that moment that your anger might have nothing to do with them and a lot to do with something else, but it's that conscious thought about it that makes the difference. And I always say that emotions are not positive or negative, the outcomes are. And so, yes, anger or fear can produce chemicals in our body that we need at that time, because if there's danger ahead, we need to be fearful so that, have all those chemicals going so that we can up and run. We need that energy. Divert it to my muscles, take it away from my, everything else, my digestion, get me booking away from the trouble. The thing is that we can produce it just with thoughts. And so when we do this, when we take our chemicals down, then we're just allowing ourselves to be in a calmer state, and our outcome then is more productive. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And what I keep thinking about is just our little example here, which is kind of a miffy little example, but you're sitting in there and that's like salt. It's salty. It's that anger, that miffness, the ways that I'm getting salty, and I need to Now, how do we balance that? How do we change the chemical reaction of salt? You need to add something sweet. So maybe if I really was conscious, like you were saying, you need to be conscious about it. Wouldn't I, instead of going that way, recognize that this salt is coming and I need to change the chemical reaction of that in the frying pan, or maybe it's pepper or whatever, and I need to change the chemical composition. What am I going to add? I'm going to add sugar. Well, what's sugar? Something that feels better. So maybe instead of going there, I flip the radio to a song that I know makes me happy and increases my endorphin level to where it brings up the sugar. So now I'm making a chemical reaction. So if I notice, if we really want to be conscious about it, we want to stay away from those negative feelings, and we call them flavors. I'm thinking, okay, you start feeling the pepper. Well, the pepper's starting to make you, starting to make you sweat, starting to make you irritated. Let's add a little sugar to it. Find that piece, that stimulus. And maybe it might be a song. I refuse to get angry at something that means nothing, that it's not deserving of my anger. I'm going to take this French fry, I'm going to put it in my mouth because it makes me feel comfortable.
Advocating food to...
No. I know that. Yeah. But what I'm saying is it's not about the French fry and the flavor of the French fry. It is.
We're changing what we're doing is we're changing the chemical composition of our recipe, right? So we're saying when I'm at a stop and somebody is on the phone, I can, this is what I'm going to do. Like what good is it doing you to get upset? Yes. And so this is you're helping yourself, right? Because that anger doesn't benefit you. And you can hurt yourself too with loving too much. It's not just the negative emotions. It's the positive ones too, quote unquote positive. You can give love inappropriately and to the wrong people because your definitions of what has to happen for you to feel love, what has to happen for you to get angry, what has to happen for you to feel certain emotions is critical, because we are cooking old recipes, right? Like the stuff I learned growing up, I'm sure the stuff you learned growing up, anybody listening, you know how unhealthy some of those recipes were. And so it's up to us to catch them and not cook them anymore. And that's what I love about what I write about, is that learning to change the recipe, because the chefs in your head, they work for you. And nobody can change them but you. When you say somebody made you mad, no, your ingredients that you received from them is what made you mad. Does that make sense for you to be mad? Or is it something else? And so it's being conscious of it. And it takes a little bit of work at the beginning, but like for me now, it's just second nature that I am more conscious in thinking about like, what is going on here? And it doesn't have to be in the moment. It can be later on. But as long as you can understand, and this is something really critical that I haven't talked about yet, is that your brain predicts, but it also can predict poorly. And when we were talking about, being tired or in a bad mood, that could lead to a poor prediction. High levels of stress, a bad diet, not getting enough sleep, all of these things, they are going to predispose you to bad predictions. And that could be in not only just what you feel, what you see, what you hear. How many people mispredict hearing all the time? It's a constant thing where we think we heard someone say something and that's not what they said. And you're like, no, I heard it. No, you didn't hear it. You heard it in your head because your own voice was over talking them, or your brain was thinking that's what they're going to say. So that's what you heard. And there's so much evidence around misprediction and getting what you think is so real wrong. And it's just part of being human and part of having a brain. And I think it's good in a lot of ways because that gives us that opportunity to correct it, or to at least try and correct it. And it also gives us that, well, I'm predisposed to being wrong. I'm predisposed to someone else being wrong, by not hearing me correctly. So being more clear, trying to be more concise, confirming things with people, like especially when it comes to communication, just because our brain can get it wrong. And, that's really humbling for me. I always used to think I'm always right.
Yeah, I get that. I tend to be in that same situation. I have this saying that I've been saying for a lot of people, and I've been saying it way before we've gone through this sensitivity area in our environment right now, which I've always like, offense is in the eye of the offended. It kind of plays with what you're talking about and the flavors, right? Yes. I always say that offense is in the eye of the offended. If you're offended, that's not about the person that you think is trying to do the offending. It's about why you're taking offense to it. And that could be these flavors, right? Yeah. These predispositions, experiences, the things that you've experienced is why you're offended. It's got nothing to do with whatever that person said or didn't say or did. It's about why are you offended? And that's your past experiences. What are those flavors that are taking place during that time that you're feeling offended?
Also, too, it's your focus. No, your brain is going to prioritize what you prioritize. So if you feel like you're always going, someone's out to get you or you're not good enough, all of these internal talks are what you're focused on. Like you said, oversensitivity. If you belong to a group or a race or a religion, so you might think that everything that happens to you is around that because that's how you identify. That's what you've prioritized for the brain. Because when all these things that are going on in your head, the brain has to use something to prioritize what it should be, and that's what it can use. So in line with what you were just talking about, I want to share this true story that's in my very first chapter in the book. It was a pre-New Year's Eve party, and this host of this party had great wines. He was a wine collector and just very generous with the few of us who were at this party. And his friend walked in late, who was also a wine collector, and he spied this bottle of Opus One on the table. So Opus One's a very fancy, schmancy wine brand. It's like Napa Valley, prestigious, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
You don't buy their wine, you acquire it. And so he went right for that bottle, poured a glass, took a sip, and he's like, I love this wine. And we're all laughing at him because what he didn't know, because his buddy, the host, knew he was going to be late, poured it half full of 2-Buck Chuck, which is a Charles Shaw brand from Trader Joe's. And he took another taste. So while we're all giggling, he goes, this isn't Opus One. The story is to say we experience what we expect. And so if we expect, if we experience a taste because we see the bottle, we see the dark color of the wine, we know our host has fabulous wines that he's always sharing, and you've never had the experience of him serving Charles Shaw brand. You know what? He got what he expected in that first taste. And so do we. And so this is why I always say it's important to take a second taste. Chefs do it all the time. They get a dish, they take a bite, and then they take another bite. Sometimes they take several. It's because they want to capture all the flavors. And we can go through life getting what we expect, but if we don't like that, well, it's up to us to change them. If you don't want to get it from the world, adjust your expectations so that you can recognize it when it's really, truly happening.
Typical manifestation, right from go back to the beginning when you watched The Secret.
But that's the whole thing. It's the brain. Manifestation sounds so woo-woo, but it's not. It's honestly like you're setting up your brain for what you want. You're telling it all the time.
And I love that. So let me just wrap this up a little bit here. And I just want to let everybody know that, okay, let's review this. book that she has, Yucky Yummy Savory Sweet, Understanding the Flavors of Emotions, right? By our lovely Kim Korte. And you can find that right on Amazon, and I will have a direct link right to that in the show notes. We'll also have Kim Korte's website, kimkorte.com, where you can get more about her and about some of the consulting that she does, and her podcast called Flavors of Emotion. When do you release Flavors of Emotion?
Right now, I'm doing it every other Wednesday, and I'm moving up. It's new for me. This whole podcasting thing is quite new. I admire podcasters tremendously. The ones who do it every week and several times a week. I mean, it's a lot, but it's every other week right now, and I'm planning in October to move it to weekly.
Fantastic. That's outstanding. Yes, I speak at conventions for podcasting, and so if you ever, please, reach out, and if you ever have any questions about anything, and I've gone the other way. This is my second podcast. My first one was back in 2018, and this is going to be episode 48. It'll be my second season 23. So it'll be second season episode 23, and we just released season 2 episode 2, which is our 27th episode. This will be like 48th episode. I'm excited about that. I just recently went from 1 day a week to 2 days a week releasing. So I'm there for you. So
well, I appreciate that.
And you're doing exactly what you should be doing, right? You're staying consistent. It's bi-monthly. Then you have an idea that you want, then you go weekly. And if you find yourself with extra content, then you can do bonus episodes before you move to twice a week if you end up doing that, or you stay on once a week. Most of the good podcasts right now are once a week. Congratulations.
Exactly. You'll change that.
I'm no Joe Rogan who does 5 days a week and does 2 to 5 hour podcasts, but hey, I don't have that kind of name.
That's a lot.
But of course, he gets millions of dollars for it too. So
someone was paying me millions of dollars to speak 5 days a week, I'd do it.
Yep, exactly. And that's a whole different story. We can talk about podcasts all day long. Definitely check a book. Check out her website, kimkorte.com, which has also got all of the stuff that I've told you before. And I'm going to put all that in the show notes, so you'll have easy access to it. And last but not least, Kim, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us on Life Changing Challengers. You continually overcame adversity, and you did it in an uncommon way, which is exactly what we do here on Life Changing Challengers.
Well, thank you for having me. Who knew that we were so similar? Right,
exactly. Right. So, and for the rest of you, please go ahead and share, subscribe, podcast, and especially if you know somebody that some of these takeaways that Kim has talked about, please share the episode so that they can take advantage of her wisdom. And for the rest of you, we will see you in the... Well, that wraps up another episode of Life Changing Challengers. I'm your host, Brad Minus, saying thank you for joining us on this journey of transformation. If today's stories inspired you, please take a moment to review, share, and follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Your support helps us reach more listeners and create an even bigger impact. Remember, every challenge is a chance to grow. Until next time, keep pushing, keep challenging, and never stop pursuing your extraordinary.